And we are live. Welcome to another edition of DT Live. Today I'm thinking I'm going to play a little bit with my Doom Emacs config. My Doom Emacs config has started to get a little long in length, has become quite bloated, but I wanted to take some time to go over some of the things in my config with those of you maybe that are trying out Emacs. You're brand new to Emacs, maybe you're brand new to Doom Emacs, and you're kind of confused about how to go about configuring this thing. I thought this would be something educational to do. So those of you that are hanging out in the chat, how is the audio? Give me just a second. I will pull up the chat here. I forgot to set this up before I started the stream. Let's see if I can capture the YouTube chat window here. There we go. All right, I think we're set up. All right. Yeah, loud and clear. All right. All right, and give me just a second. Make sure I have all of my scenes here set up. Definitely going to need that one. All right. And before I get started here, let me just quickly catch up on the chat. Some of you guys were here early. Let's see. Peter, T-minus 23. Huh? He was here 23 minutes early. Thanks for being here, Peter. Let's see. Zed says, I would like to see him turning Emacs into an IDE. We may play with some stuff that is IDE-like in my config. Jose is asking, do you guys know of a Vim equivalent of EXWM for managing X Windows? Vim cannot manage X Windows because Vim is actually not a GUI application. Vim has to run in a terminal or TTY. So Vim, there's no way for Vim to manage X Windows because Vim itself is not an X application, right? It has to run inside a terminal or a TTY. Now, gvim, being a GUI application, gvim potentially could be turned into something like EXWM, but I don't know if there's any plugins for gvim that attempt that. But no, Vim and Emacs, they're very different programs. Vim, or Emacs, is actually a graphical application. That's why it can manage X Windows. So that's one of the limitations you're going to find with Vim. Yeah, audio good. Audio is audible. Okay. And Kareem, a special hello from the land of pharaohs. Hello to you, Kareem. Or Kareem. I don't use Emacs, but I'm still here for the show. Well, this will be fun, whether you use Emacs or not. You might see some pretty neat stuff that you can do in Emacs. Maybe you can emulate it, some of this behavior in your text editor of choice. Maybe Vim or whatever you happen to be using. How's it going with EXWM? I'm not in EXWM today. I'm going to be doing this in Xmonad. The problem with having EXWM in my config is when I log into other window managers, which I do often, and then try to launch Emacs, Emacs complains because it's trying to launch EXWM, but you can't launch EXWM when another window manager is already running. So we actually will not be covering EXWM today because it's not in my current config. But EXWM, I did a video, or maybe 2 videos on it here, not too recently, but a few weeks ago I did those videos on EXWM. It's pretty easy to get started with EXWM. Hey DT, what's your favorite image viewer? Any of them. They all are essentially the same. The one I'm typically using these days is SXIV, but really whatever happens to be on the system. Like if I install a distribution and it already has an image viewer on the system, I typically don't replace it. Although these days I will say that a lot of times just previewing images, I'm doing that in my file managers or in Emacs. And dear Ed, the file manager in Emacs, I can preview images if I want to. Hey DT, hope you have a nice day. Yeah, it's been an alright day today. I thought I would do one of these live streams because I haven't done a lot of live streams lately. As a matter of fact, I haven't done any live streams lately. I did that gaming live stream the other day. 2 days ago, I did the 0 AD live stream, but I couldn't interact with the chat while playing that game because it's a real-time strategy game, and I can't take my eye off of that game while I'm playing it, or I would lose horribly. But, you know, that was an unusual stream because I don't game, and it's not really the topic of this channel, gaming. So I thought, you know what, I need to do another live stream and actually talk about Linux. You know, talk about, you know, what the channel is actually about most of the time. Yeah, Robert says, "Hey DT, first time catching your stream here. Hope you're having a great day." It's been a lovely day so far. But why don't we get started? So we are in Xmonad today, and we may actually play a little bit with my Xmonad config because some of my Xmonad config is tied into Emacs as well. I mean, I have a lot of Xmonad key bindings that do Emacs-y things. So I'm going to go ahead and launch Doom Emacs here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do big mode, big font mode. So in my config, space TB toggles big font mode, which basically just changes my default font size from whatever it is, 15-point font, 16-point font. It blows it up, I think, to 24-point font. I can change those settings, but that's what I have it. And for those of you new to Doom Emacs, if you're trying out Doom Emacs, if you do space FR, that will show you your recent files. If you've been playing with some recent files, for example, my Doom config is right there. Now, if you're just opening Doom Emacs for the first time, space FR will not do anything because you haven't edited any files yet. So why would that list have anything in it? It won't. So what you want to pull up is the directory editor, dir ed. And this is your file manager essentially built into Emacs. Easy way to get it is do space period. And it says find file. So this is the find file command. It's basically a directory structure. You just navigate around until you find the file that you want to edit. So if I wanted my Doom config, it's going to be in my home directory at .doomd. And you can tab complete for the paths. If you got a very long path you're trying to type, for example, I could try to tab complete that. Well, it won't because there's two configs. Let me just type it out. Config.org is my config file. Now let me go to the top of this document here. By default, the Doom Emacs config is config.el. It ends in .el because it's an E-Lisp document. But I wanted a literate config, meaning I wanted to be able to organize it with comments and tables of key bindings and have a table of contents where I could click on something and immediately go to it. For example, the fonts we were just talking about, I could click on that and it immediately goes to the fonts section of this document. And here we have, if you're interested in what fonts you're looking at, I often get questions about fonts and things like that. Right now I'm using Ubuntu Mono Nerd Font as the font inside Emacs. And the reason is because Ubuntu Mono is very easy on the eyes. You know, I'm in my 40s and my eyesight isn't great. It's not horrible, but it isn't great. I find Ubuntu Mono very easy to read. I think it's a fantastic monospace font. The other thing I like about Ubuntu Mono is it's a very complete font set. It has a normal font. It also has an italicized and a bold font. And that's very important because a lot of these monospace fonts I found don't have an italicized face. And you see that Emacs uses italics a lot. For example, you see setQ here. That function, because it's a function, it is italicized. But if I was using a font that didn't have italics, it just wouldn't be italicized. And I like having, some of the different fonts. Some of the fonts are normal, some of it's italicized, some of it'll be bold. If I go down here and find one of my key bindings tables here, you can see that the way I'm doing these tables here to let you guys know about my key bindings, I give you the command, just normal, then the description, and I have the description italicized. Why do I do that? It's because that's kind of the way Emacs does anyway. If I do Meta X, Alt X on the keyboard, this allows you to run a Emacs command. And here are the Emacs commands maybe I want to run, and here are their descriptions. You notice the descriptions by default are italicized, so I wanted to kind of keep that same thing in my descriptions here. I hope some of that, makes sense. Now, if I tried to alphabetize my Doom Emacs config here. And I don't know if I necessarily want to go in order of some of this stuff, because some of this stuff gets pretty deep. For example, the very first thing in the config, other than the About section of my config, is Bookmarks and Buffers. If you're very new to Emacs, buffers, think of everything that you open in Emacs is saved in a buffer. For example, right now I have my Doom Emacs config.org open. What if I wanted to open my Doom Emacs packages.el file? Well, that opens in another buffer. Well, where did my config.org go? Well, it's still around. We can pull it up. If I type space B, capital B, you will see a list of all the buffers that are open right now in Doom Emacs, and I can switch between them. For example, I could go back to the config.org if I wanted. I think if I just did space BN for next buffer, yeah, that would work. Space BP for previous buffer would actually get me back there. And I don't know if those are default Doom Emacs key bindings or I added those. We may discover that as we go through the config a little deeper. I think I will take a minute or two to get back to the chat, because I know you guys may have some questions. So let me make sure I get back here. I don't want to miss anything important. Peter is asking, is that your painting? No, I have absolutely no artistic skills at all. Seriously, what is the use of C-Matrix? It looks badass, Hunter. That's the point of C-Matrix. Come on now. Did you really have to ask that question? Vladislav, love your content. Thank you for showing me Emacs. Yeah, Emacs is pretty fantastic. Once you get into it, it's hard to escape it. It really is. Helm or Ivy? In Doom Emacs, they use Ivy, I believe, by default. Both are probably here. Well, I'll check that in a second. One of them has better performance than the other, and whichever one has better performance is the one Doom Emacs is using, because I've read that on their homepage before. I think Helm is a little slower. Let's see. Yeah, DT, you're making me want to learn Emacs. I'm getting lazy in my old age. Well, you know what? Emacs, there's a lot to learn, but it's not like you got to learn it all in one day. You can learn it in chunks. And you don't have to learn, like Emacs is so complicated. You can go in a million different directions. You go in the directions that you want to go. Like if you're more interested in programming, if your career is programming, then you're going to do Emacs one way. If you're interested in creative writing, you're going to set up Emacs to do something else. Emacs can do a lot of things. Emacs can do anything, actually. Super chat here from Jay Lynn. He says, good day. Thanks heaps for sharing all of your experience and great tools. I found so many better ways of working via your content. Cheers. Thank you, Jay Lynn. Appreciate that super chat. Yeah, do you use BSPWM? I have it installed on the system. I don't often log into it. Every now and then I'll log into it. It's a manual tiling window manager, and I prefer dynamic tiling window managers like Xmonad. But BSPWM, it's a fine window manager. I've lived in it before. Like for weeks at a time, trying it out. Is your Emacs configuration available in your GitHub? I have a GitLab. So go to gitlab.com/DWT1. Go to my .files repository and go to the .doom.d directory. And, we should probably do this. Just a second, guys. I wasn't planning on pulling up a browser today, so I didn't have that set up. Let me go to my GitLab. All right. If you go to my .files repository here, go to .doomd. In the .doomd directory, you have all of the config files that I use. Really, the three most people are going to want are the three standard Doom Emacs config files, are the config.el, the init.el, and the packages.el. These other two files, the aliases and the config.org, you may or may not want these aliases or my eShell aliases. We'll talk about the E shell in a minute. Config.org is just the org document, right? What you guys have been looking at on screen here. Config.org is this. It's just when you look at it in a web browser, you get this nice, the tables and everything. I think that starts making sense now. You have these source code blocks. All of this is done in this fancy kind of markdown that is org mode. And then the source code blocks actually write to config.el. I hope that makes sense. And this is what people refer to as literate programming, meaning, I have these source code blocks that get written to the real program, the real config file, config.el. All of this extra stuff, like, the headings and the tables and all of this stuff, this is just here for description, for comments. Back to the chat for a second. Probably missed some stuff here. Let's see. Yeah, and the same person was asking, can it be used for normal Emacs? I don't like Doom Emacs. So you could take some of my config files and try to adapt it to just standard GNU Emacs, but you can't just rip these and think they're going to work in GNU Emacs, because Doom Emacs also installs some custom modules and things to make things work. But I bet you could work it out. Also, if you say you don't like Doom Emacs, one thing a lot of people don't realize with Doom Emacs is pretty much everything you like or don't like about it, you can change. You can turn off. For example, if we get back into the config file here, let me full screen this, because there's no reason to see the panel there in Xmonad. I do space FR for recent files, and I go to init.el. So in your .doom.d folder, there is init.el. You don't often edit this file or anything. What this does, these are all the modules and extensions and everything, plugins that are installed by default with Doom Emacs, but they're installed, but they're not actually active. Right, they're on your system, but until you come in here and uncomment these lines, like maggot right here. Maggot, I think, is uncommented by default with Doom Emacs, but if I never use maggot, I could comment that out. I could get in here and just put a couple of semicolons in front of that, and now when I resync Doom Emacs, maggot will no longer be enabled and active. So, like, if you find there's a lot of stuff going on in Doom Emacs that you don't typically use, just open that init.el and just get rid of the stuff that you don't actually use. They kill that buffer because I don't really want to play with the init.el today. All right, getting back to the config file here. Bookmarks and buffers. So we talked a little bit about what a buffer is. A bookmark is essentially saving a position, a point. So what is a point? Well, let me put my cursor here. What that is a point. I can save that point. If I do, I don't know how to save a bookmark. Oh, luckily I had the key binding here. It is space BW. Now I set that. I don't think that was default, because I doubt I would have taken the time to write this out if it was a key binding that already existed. But if I do space BW, it says saving bookmark. Okay. Now if I do space B capital L for list bookmarks, it's not here. Why is it not here? Let's try that again. Space BW, saving bookmark. I wonder why it's not saving that bookmark. Maybe I'm not doing that right. I don't often play with bookmarks. I don't find them that useful. It's bookmark set, not save, that we need. And that is set with space BM. So let me go back here and do space BM to set a bookmark. Okay, now it's asking for a name. I'm going to just call it Bookmarks and Buffers, because that's the heading. And now if I do space B capital L to list the bookmarks, you see I actually have that bookmark here. I could click on it with the mouse or hit enter with the keyboard, and it immediately goes to the document and the position that we were working in the document. And just to prove that this works even when the document is gone, and by gone I mean we can kill this buffer. If I do space B kill for buffer kill, we completely killed that buffer. Config.org is gone. But if I do space B capital L again to list the bookmarks and buffers, and I hit enter, you see, I'm back in the correct document at the correct point. So that is what a bookmark is. Now, I don't want to keep that bookmark, so if I go in here, and I think if I do capital D for delete, or no, I don't think that works. Let me see. Bookmark dash delete, space B capital M. Space B capital M deletes. And do we want to confirm that? Yes, we do. All right, and then Q to quit out of the bookmark list. That is a little bit about bookmarks. Centaur Tabs. This is actually installed by default in Doom Emacs. It is not enabled by default in Doom Emacs. I'm glad it's not enabled by default because tabs don't make really much sense in Emacs. Really don't make much sense in Vim either. But in Emacs, because you work with buffers, there's no reason to have tabs. You work with buffers, and if you want to see multiple buffers at a time, you work with splits. If I do space WV for window vertical split, now I've got 2 splits, and I could, get into this split here. If I wanted to, I could do space period to get the directory editor open. And if I wanted to, I could get in here and do my bash RC, open my bash RC in that split here. If I wanted to go to a different buffer in this split, I could do space B, capital B again, and I could go to one of the other open buffers. There's really nothing open. I could go to the Doom front page, the start page there, though, just to go to something else, but space B, capital B again, and I could go back to the bash RC. I could do space WC for window close. It's very similar to the default Vim commands, by the way. Instead of space WV in Vim, it's control WV, and those actually still work in Doom Emacs because it emulates Vim, so I could do control WV for vertical split, control WC for close. But if you prefer the space leader key, space WV, space WC. Of course, horizontal splits would be done with control WS, yeah, for the, no, that's not it. What is the horizontal split there? The problem with 2 is Emacs calls horizontal splits and vertical splits the opposite of what Vim calls them. I don't know why. I don't often do a horizontal split though, but you could just do a colon SP for split. And there we go. Actually, I did open it the first time. I now have 3 horizontal splits going on here. If I do space WW, I can cycle through them. Space WW, space WC to close, space WC to close, and now I just have the 1 split open. For you guys that want to see Centaur Tabs in action, I would have to enable it with the init.el. So let me get back into the init.el, and somewhere in here there is tabs, I believe. Yeah, right there. And what we need to do is simply uncomment that, write that. I'm going to open up a terminal here, and I'm going to run doom sync. And this is an alias, by the way. That's not the actual command. The actual command is .doom-d slash, what is it, bin? I may have to cd into it and see, because I never actually typed the full path because I have an alias to it. It's not in .doom.d. It's in .emacs.d /bin/doom and then sync. That's a long command to type. So I alias that to just doom sync, all one word. That rebuilds Doom Emacs. And it rebuilds it using what you did in the init.el, also your packages.el as well. So, and just to make sure, let's kill all Emacs, because it will kill my Emacs client. It will also kill the Emacs daemon, the Emacs server. That way we make sure that when we relaunch, this will be the newly configured Doom Emacs with tabs enabled. Let me open up my config.org, and you see I have a tab here. Let me open up another org document. So I'm going to do space period. I'm going to go to my org folder where I keep all of my org documents. Not in my home directory anymore. There we go. And I'm just going to find a random org document here. For example, ubuntu-stagnation.org. This was just show notes for a video I did a couple of months back. But it actually tabs these. And there are key bindings or I set key bindings to do different things like cycling through the tabs. It looks like if you are in Centaur Tabs mode, I could do G and then the right arrow key. G right. Okay. G left. I guess for go right, go left. Now, I took the time to set all of this up. I set some custom key bindings that I thought made sense. Even though I don't use Centaur Tabs, I've never used it. Now, why did I put this in my config? I put this in my config for you guys. Just in case any of you guys want to use tabs, you know, I put it there. I will tell you, at least half of the stuff in my Doom Emacs config, I don't actually use. I've told you guys this about my Xmonad config, which is massive. You know, I've got so many different modules imported in my Xmonad config, and I'm doing so much stuff in that config, mainly just because you guys are going to ask questions about how to do some things. So when I figure out how to do something, I always throw it in these configs, even if I don't use it, just because I know some of you guys are going to come behind me. You might find some of this stuff useful. Let me go back to the chat for a second. I also had a cup of coffee here, probably getting cold. All right. I know I missed a lot of chat that was going by here. I do apologize for that. All right. Do you have any opinion on Spacemacs as an alternative to Doom Emacs? I briefly tried Spacemacs in the past. I haven't done anything on camera with it. It looks good, but I found it to be a bit more bloated. I found Doom Emacs easier to work with. Really, once you know about these three config files, the config.el, which is your traditional config file where you put all your stuff, packages.el, where any third-party plugins that Doom Emacs doesn't already have installed, you put in packages.el, and the init.el, which I showed you where you either comment or uncomment the lines for the modules that are already within Doom Emacs. You can toggle them on and off. Once you learn how those three documents work, Doom Emacs is really easy to set up. All right, it's just too many shortcuts. Well, I create more shortcuts than needed because, again, I don't use half the stuff in my config, right? And the great thing about keyboard shortcuts and things like Emacs or Vim or your tiling window managers is you can always pull up your config and look up the shortcuts. And sometimes I have to do that. If it's a key binding for something I don't often do, I'll just pull up the config and do a quick search for it. All right. Try Python plus LSP. That was, you were responding to somebody else? Yes. Yeah, you can enable pretty much every programming language as far as syntax, highlighting, and all of that. Python, of course, is in that list. LSP is also, I think, in the Doom Emacs init.el. So you can toggle that or, uncomment that line. Let's see. How did you get into free software in Linux even though you are not a programmer? I was tired of Windows. But even before that, even before switching to Linux, I've been a Firefox user since day one of Firefox. And before that, going back to, Netscape and all of that, which technically wasn't free software. But then, then they went on to create Mozilla and Firefox and Thunderbird. I've been using that software for 2 decades. So I've always known what free software was. I've always known what Linux was too. I mean, I knew what Linux was back in, the mid-90s, even though I was still using Windows, because of doing some, just building websites, for myself, just playing as a kid. I was probably 18 years old at that time, and I just wanted to create some websites because that was at the birth of the web. And I thought, man, this was really cool technology. I'm going to make my own websites. And what did all the web servers run? They all run Linux. That's what they ran back then. That's still what they run. So it helped to know a little bit about Linux and the licensing, free software, open source software. Have you used Edwina for Emacs? It gives you DWM style splits inside Emacs. I've heard of the plugin. It's like I guess an alternative to EXWM. But I don't know why I would need it over EXWM. I don't know what it would give me. So when you say DWM style splits, though, I'm assuming what you're talking about there, Nick, is what does it have a master and stack mode instead of you actually deciding, hey, split it vertically, split it horizontally, something like that? You have predefined layouts or something? Let's see, tabs versus different windows. What is better and what do you prefer? Yeah, I don't typically use tabs in anything other than a web browser. And I don't use a ton of tabs, even when I'm browsing the web. Probably because I used web browsers before tabs were a thing, So, I've never been one of those people I've got 30 tabs open. I may have 5, if I'm working on something and I need quick access to 4 or 5 different pages. But I'm not one of those people that have 100 tabs open, all the time. What's the point in that? I do like the buffer system with Emacs. You just get a buffer list and you're good to go. If I do MetaX, I have a plugin here called iBuffer, which looks like I created a binding, space BI. Let me do that, space BI. This is iBuffer. It is a nice visualization of all your buffers, and I could have 200 buffers open here. And I could quickly navigate through them, so I've got that binded to always come up, space BI. I can get this up, and I can quickly move to a different buffer, space BI, and I can go to that buffer. Of course, I ended up going to the same buffer both times. Let me get back into here. Really don't care about the Centaur tabs. The Centaur tabs, though, are really interesting because you notice. Let me go back to the iBuffer. These are all my open buffers. And the first 2 that are in white are normal document buffers. Now these that are a different color, they're blue, and they have the asterisks before and after the name. These are special kinds of buffers. These are not really buffers you typically want to do anything in. The one that's marked Doom is the start page buffer, basically, is the Startify buffer that has the Doom Emacs logo and some important key bindings. There's a Scratch buffer. Scratch is, I can just start typing some random stuff here. I could even type some E-Lisp code and evaluate it in this Scratch buffer. That's something I needed to do. And then there's a Messages buffer, which just has some messages for me. So the tabs don't actually use those typically, well, or do they? Let me go back to that Doom Emacs buffer. You see, this is what's weird about Centaur tabs, and I kind of like it. This isn't bad. When I get into these special buffers, I have tabs for those. And those special buffers are the Doom start page, the Scratch, the iBuffer, messages. You see all of them begin and end with asterisks. But if I switch to a different buffer, say a org document, now we just have tabs for org documents. Well, what if I opened an E-Lisp document? Well, now the org tabs go away. Now I just have tabs for E-Lisp files. That's kind of confusing, right? I don't know if I like that or I don't. I think I just prefer using buffer lists and just switching between everything in buffers. Let me get back to config.org here. Yeah. Peter in the chat says, iBuffer is patented by Apple. Expect to be sued. I wonder, whoever created that Emacs plugin and called it iBuffer, I wonder if they did that on purpose. Of course, you know, the original creator of Emacs, Richard Stallman, you know, he has a very special relationship with Apple. I love it when he refers to iPads as the iBad. Yeah, you may like Buffler as an alternative to iBuffer. Yeah, I've heard a little bit about Buffler. I don't know if I've ever checked it out, though. I don't think it's actually installed currently. I don't think I've done anything with it. No. Not one of the default Doom Emacs packages, so it would have had to have been something that I added specifically to packages.el. So the packages.el file. These are all the third-party extensions that I had to go and put in this file because they're not in the init.el. You know, they're not something I can just comment or uncomment in that file. These are, you know, the extra stuff. If we go back to config.org here, we may not get through this entire config today because we're not even close, but I'll just briefly talk about DearEd. DearEd, of course, is the file manager within Emacs, and you can see I set up this table for those of you that want to follow along. You know, these are the commands, and you probably don't know what some of these Emacs commands are, like you see DearEd jump. Well, what does that actually do? Well, I give you a description. It jumps to the current directory in DearEd. So, for example, right now, this document I'm working in is in .doom.d. So if I did space DJ, well, I didn't, space DJ, it opens DearEd in the directory that I was working in. If I did space DD, it just opens DearEd. Where does it open? Well, it opens it wherever I want. By default, the directory I'm in, if I just hit enter right now, but if I would prefer maybe just to go into my home directory, you know, I could do that. If I wanted to search, traditionally, just like in Vim, you do a slash. Maybe I want to search for my wallpapers directory. I'm going to go into wallpapers here. And if I wanted to, I could toggle on images. I'm not sure what key binding I did for that. Let me get back into config.org. Somewhere in here, I mentioned that when I'm in DearEd mode, the key bindings I want to use are HJKL for navigating. Now, actually, J and K are for navigating up and down. You don't ever need to go left and right in a file manager. What do left and right do? Well, they either open a file or a directory, or they go up a directory. I hope that makes sense. And then I have peep DearEd image previews as space DP. All right. So let me go back to the buffer list here, and let me go back to DearEd wallpapers. And if I do, what was it? Space DP. There it is. There's my image previews. Similar, you know, how you get image previews in something like Ranger, although it opens every single one in a buffer. I didn't realize that. That will make my buffer list quite large if I previewed a whole bunch of images. So I would have to go in here and kill all of these buffers eventually, but I'll leave them for now. It's actually kind of nice to get iBuffer with a million things in it so you guys can kind of see how iBuffer works. Let me get back to my config.org there. So that's DearEd. That's just your file manager. Also in Emacs, or not Emacs, in Xmonad, I have all of the common Emacs plugins that I use all the time, key binding with Xmonad. For example, Control E followed by an E opens Doom Emacs. That's how I opened Doom Emacs earlier. But if I do Control E D, it opens a new Emacs window with DearEd. I do Control E S, this opens the E shell. This is the E shell within Emacs. You know, I can do it LS and clear and everything else. And then I think some of the other things I had binded, I had Control E B, I think for iBuffer, yeah, Control E B. I would have to open up my xmonad config file to see everything that I had key binded as far as Emacs, because I think I had 8 or 10 things that I could pull up quickly. But the only ones I ever really use are just pulling up Emacs itself and pulling up DIRED and pulling up the E shell. Those are the only ones that I use all the time. Back to the chat for a second. We could do an entire video on DIRED, and I probably need to do one at some point. But I'm going to move on from DIRED after this because we're going to get bogged down. Some of these topics are so big. Eventually, we're going to come to an org mode section. I may just skip that. I've talked about org mode plenty of times on the channel. Because org mode, I could make videos on for years and never run out of stuff to talk about with org mode. For Windows, Emacs is a better option than Vim because of all the extra features. I've never used Emacs or Vim in Windows. I don't know. Both of them work in Windows. There are a lot of Emacs and Vim users that use Windows, so I'm assuming they work. How well do they work compared to the Linux versions? I'm sure there's some limitations. As a matter of fact, one of the limitations I can go ahead and talk about is the E shell. The E shell is a shell with a lot of functions rewritten in E-Lisp. A lot of your standard functions like the ls command I ran earlier and cat and pwd, print working directory, all those traditional bash shell commands. They've been rewritten just for the E shell. And the E shell works just fine in Windows. It works exactly like it does in Linux. And that's important because just your standard shell, for example, let me pull up, a bash shell, or in this case, a fish shell. Is this going to work in Windows? When you start doing ls and pwd and cd and mv and cp and all of those traditional fish commands, bash commands, zsh commands, and those shells, no, right? Of course, those shells aren't going to work right in Windows. Those commands aren't going to work right in Windows. That's one of the real benefits, actually, with Emacs over Vim. If you were going to use Windows, is because Emacs does have that E shell, which works fine with Windows. All right, we got the K1 Kos. I'm a casual Manjaro user, but I saw your channel, and now every day in my dreams I edit my xmonad configs on Arch. Well, those are good choices. Manjaro or Arch or xmonad, yeah. You got some good taste there. Yeah, I think the Centaur tabs show up on per project basis. Yeah, that would make sense too. No, because the config.el is in the same directory as config.org, and I think it groups them by mode. That's probably what it's doing. Because if I go back here, config.org and config.el are actually in the same project. Actually, config.org and this Ubuntu stagnation.org, I know they're not in the same project. They're not. This is in the .doom directory, and this is in my org directory where I just stuff all like show notes and things. So these are definitely not in the same project directory. Oddly enough, though, config.org and config.el are in the exact same directory. So they should be lumped together, but again, I think it's grouping them by modes. E-Lisp mode in the cases of these, and org mode in the cases of these. And then, of course, the special modes for the Doom start screen and the scratch pad and all of that. So I'm assuming how that works. I don't typically use Centaur tabs. Again, I added that to my config for you guys that are going to enable it, because it is installed by default in Doom Emacs. It's not enabled by default. But I know some of you are probably eventually going to try it out and wonder what's going on with it, so I thought I'd try it first. I'd be the guinea pig. Yeah, Frank says, hey, DT, is there a trick to open the picture previews in DIRED single so that all buffers get closed when you leave the preview. You could probably program it to do that. I don't have those skills at the moment. I'm not an E-Lisp master. You probably could do that. But I don't know, Emacs is one of those weird things. Everything's a buffer. As soon as you open something, because technically the image previews is just opening it in a new split in a new buffer. Those buffers don't go away until you go into something like iBuffer or Buffler or something like that, and go in there and start killing all the buffers that you're not going to use. But I bet you could I bet somebody's worked that out. Let's see. I use Mint at the moment since that crappy EliteBooks UEFI support sucks. Okay. Well, Mint is a fine distro too. But if certain distros give you a problem on certain hardware, you just keep trying them until you find one that works. Let's see. I've been using Doom for a year at work, and I've configured maybe 3 things. Yeah. To be honest, and I mentioned I don't use most of the stuff in my config. I do this trying it out mainly just to share with you guys on camera. I don't use most of this stuff. I could actually use Doom Emacs out of the box with no configuration done, with 1 or 2 exceptions. There's a couple of things that I wanted to set up that are not set up by default in Doom Emacs that I actually had to put in the config, but for the most part, I could delete 90% of this config and still be okay. All right, so let's I've been going for about 45 minutes. I don't know how long I was going to stream here, but we are nowhere near. We're not even halfway through this config, probably not even a third of the way through. So I'm just going to very briefly talk about the next couple of sections. Doom theme. This is just loading a new theme. And I put this here mainly for people asking me what my theme is. So setQ is basically a variable. It's basically setting. What's it setting? It's setting Doom theme, and then what is Doom theme? What are we setting it to? This particular theme here called Doom 1. Doom 1 is the default color scheme for Doom Emacs, and I like it. So that's the one I'm going with right now. I have a key binding here. If I wanted to load a new theme, I could do space HT. And here is a list of all the available Doom Emacs themes. So if I wanted to, I could go to Monokai, which is a nice color scheme. I like it. If I hit enter, we could switch over to the Monokai color scheme. Space HT, and if I wanted to, let me go back to Doom 1, if I can find it in this list. There it is. There's also a light variant of Doom 1, and I'm sure, Dracula is in there, probably solarized. A lot of the common color schemes you expect to find are in that list. And I love that they have so many already there built in. You don't have to go in and search for a theme. You're probably going to find some color schemes in that list that they're just going to be just fine for you. And I really like the default one, so that's the one I go with. As a matter of fact, I like the Doom 1 Emacs theme so much that I actually copied that theme over for my Alacrity terminal and Vim, Xmonad. The colors in this Xmobar very similar to Doom 1. Just because I liked the Doom Emacs Doom 1 theme so much, I themed the rest of my window manager around it. All right, getting through some of this other stuff. LFeed is a RSS feed reader. I won't spend too much time on that, but if I do MetaX, and let's just launch LFeed. Now, I haven't updated it in a while, so a lot of these stories are all the way back in November, but it's just your standard feed reader, right? Oh, what did I get into here? We're in the E shell. And we're in insert mode because we're in the E shell, so my key bindings weren't working. Let's get back into config.org. So it's just a standard RSS feed reader. Actually pretty easy to set up and pretty nice. EMMS is the Emacs Multimedia System. It's your music player within Emacs. And I really spent some time trying to set this up, even though I don't use it. Again, kind of like Centaur Tabs. I wanted to play with it before you guys played with it. So I set key bindings for space A, I guess for audio. And the reason I chose these key bindings is by default, Doom Emacs doesn't use space A as a prefix for any of its key bindings. So I figured all the audio commands are going to be space A plus another key. So if I do space A, it says no current EMMS buffer. Well, we could open one. We do meta X EMMS, and I could go through my 80s music folder here. Of course, we really can't play anything. We would get a strike here. Maybe I should have. I'd probably do better if I went into something else. But if I wanted to, will Dizzy Gillespie give me a strike? Let's see if that plays. Yeah, it's playing. I'll stop it though. That was going to be Manteca. You guys know Manteca. I'll never go back to Georgia, right? Any jazz fans out there? I actually don't listen to much jazz. It's kind of odd because I live in Louisiana and I'm a trombonist, right? And I don't, not a big fan of jazz as far as listening to it. I do like playing jazz every now and then. Really love playing Dixieland jazz. Those are the funnest tunes. If you get together with, as a trombonist, if I can get together with a trumpet player and a tuba player and play some old Dixieland, those are some great tunes. Yeah, jazz over metal, says MJ. I like both. Yeah. Hair Metal Max. I like hair metal. Obviously, you saw my collection in my 80s music folder, right? So, all right. So that was EMMS, and you guys, if you want to play with it, you can see all of my key bindings here. I won't bore you with what each of these settings and functions are. Then I have this section here. I called it Evaluate E-Lisp Expressions, and this is just if I want to evaluate a piece of E-Lisp code. So I write a piece of E-Lisp code, maybe in the scratch pad, or maybe I have a source block in a org document. I have ways to evaluate that. I can evaluate, a region, a selection, or I can evaluate all the code in this buffer, or whatever it is I want to do. I will skip that for now because I don't want to evaluate anything here. Not in this org document, because I think it would print the results too in the document. It would pollute the document a little bit, and I'd have to go back and delete some stuff. EWW is the Emacs web browser. So that is the built-in browser in Emacs, the Emacs web browser, EWW. I did have some key bindings for it. I didn't create a table yet, I guess, for the key bindings. But if I do space EW, and I'm using E because I don't think Doom Emacs uses space E for anything, so that's what I chose for both evaluating E-Lisp expressions. I use space E, and for any key bindings for EWW, I use space E. So space EW, and it's going to ask me, hey, URL or keywords. So I can give it URL or I can give it a keyword to search. Let's say I want to go to distro. Why don't we go to distrowatch.com? Let's see. There's any new distro releases that I need to know about. And the page is taking a minute to load here. Taking a long time to load. I don't know if that's a problem with EWW, a problem with distrowatch.com, or a problem with me streaming while trying to do this. Well, it's not wanting to load though, is it? I'm going to do space WC to close that window. Let's go back to EWW. Let's try distrotube.com. That's a better site to go to because my site is static. It's a Hugo site, so it loads very quickly. And it opens in this horizontal split here. Let's make it a little bigger. Yeah, and there's distrotube.com. So that is the Emacs web browser, EWW. And I set just a few key bindings for it. There's some built-in key bindings already, but I wanted to be able to search for blocks of text in it. So if I was in EWW and I grabbed a block of text and then I did space SW, I would search the web for that block of text, things like that. Fonts we've already talked about. I did a video specifically about setting the fonts in Doom Emacs. Check that video. Ivy is the completion framework for Emacs. You guys were asking about him, and Ivy is the framework that Doom Emacs uses. This would be quite a deep topic. I've got a lot going on here with Ivy here. We may talk a little bit about it. Let me go back to the chat for a second. Ivy probably needs to be a dedicated video as well. Let's see. What distro would you pick for a laptop? Any. They're all the same, right? The same ones I'd pick for my desktop. I mean, what's the difference between a desktop and laptop? Yeah. The distro doesn't really matter that much. They all use the same kernel, so you should have all the same hardware support regardless of distro. Now, if that's a question more of what desktop environment maybe is more suited for a smaller screen, things like that, that's a different question. But the distro itself doesn't matter at all. Let's see. If you like metal and jazz, give Opeth a try. I have never heard of that. But I may check that out. Let's see. We've got some suggestions about I'm using Arch, and now I want to try something different. Yeah. Try something different. How many packages do you have installed from the AUR, though? Think about that before you leave Arch or Arch-based distros. You know, depending on what you need as far as software. But, you know, everybody has pretty good repositories for the most part. Debian and Debian-based distros have great repositories. Gentoo, most of your software is going to be in the Gentoo repositories or, you know, a Gentoo overlay of some kind. As somebody mentioned, Emacs, Pop! OS, yeah, all good distros. I often install Emacs on friends and family computers, you know, depending if it's an older computer. I think XFCE is a better choice for their machine. Emacs is a great distro. If you had any Emacs performance issues with high DPI monitors, I don't have any high DPI monitors, so I can't answer those questions. Yeah, Debian is more of a hassle as you need to download non-free drivers. Well, you're going to have to, yeah. You're going to have to use non-free drivers on every distro, but with Debian, because they're not there by default, you have to enable a third-party repository to get that non-free software. Because Debian really tries to be strictly free software. That's why Debian actually calls itself Debian GNU/Linux in deference to GNU and the Free Software Foundation and Richard Stallman. You know, GNU/Linux, meaning we're trying to stick strictly to free software here. They don't quite make it to being 100% free. Obviously, they don't use the Linux Libre kernel, so that prevents them from being one of the 100% free, as in freedom distros that the FSF endorses. But Debian, yeah, is pretty hardcore about free software. So it kind of makes it not the greatest distro for the brand new Linux user. DT, have you heard of or tested Org Roam? Yes, I've heard of it. Haven't played much with it. I probably won't do, when I get to the org mode part of the config, I may not cover any of that stuff, because that's another deep one, kind of like this Ivy section. We've been streaming an hour. It's like we're not even halfway through the config, which if I don't get through the whole config, you know, we may save some of this for another day. All right, so the first part of my Ivy config, I installed a third-party plugin called Ivy POS frame, position frame. It's where do I want these Ivy windows to appear? I can have them appear at the bottom. For example, if I did space period, you know, do I necessarily want this at the bottom? Maybe I want it at the top. Maybe I want it centered in the middle of the screen. And that's kind of what Ivy POS frame is. It allows me to put these things where I want. By default, I just like all of these being the standard horizontal split at the bottom of the screen, which is the default that Doom Emacs pretty much does for all of these anyway. So I don't necessarily need this in my config, but I added it because if anybody ever has any questions about that or wanted to move some of these things around, and you can set these for whatever. For example, these are plugins within Emacs: Swiper, Complete Symbol, Council MX, Council ESH History. Matter of fact, that is one that I did change from the default, which is splitting at the bottom, to putting it in the center of the screen. So let me open up eShell. So I do Control ES here in Xmonad. And let's see, what was that? Council ESH History. I probably have that key binded, but I don't know what it would be. So let's do, Council ESH History. This is my history. And you see, it appears in the center of the window. That's what IV pos frame is doing. IV pos frame display at window center. Because by default, if I did not have that, it would just split it, horizontally at the bottom of the screen, just like most of the other stuff that you guys have seen here. It would split it, I am not focused on the right. There we go. Multi-monitor system, and my mouse is moving around to another monitor here. All right, make sure I've got control of everything here. So under IV, I had subcategories for IV pos frame. I have IV key binding. So this is just for me here, to where I could quickly get to IV push view and IV switch view. So to see these in action, space VP for IV push view. And I could name this, and I guess by default it's going to name it config.org. And if I wanted to, space VS, I could switch between these. It's almost kind of a quick way to switch between windows, frames, buffers, is what that is. There's other ways we could do this too. When I eventually get to the end of this config, we could also do this with something called winner mode. Matter of fact, since I'm already here and it's kind of very similar, if I do winner mode, it's almost like it saves layouts. Think of your tiling window manager layouts. Well, the same thing with winner mode here. If I do space WV, for example, and I get a vertical split here, and maybe I want to do something different in this window here. So let's switch buffers here. And just to have something different on each one. Now, if I do space W right, so space W right, I can't go in that direction because there's nothing there yet. Let's go space W left for winner undo, space W left. See, it's kind of undoing everything. Kind of going back through everything that I'd done before. If I go the other direction, I keep going back to, where I'm at now. I hope that makes sense. I haven't played with winner mode that much. It's actually built into Emacs. That's not something that I had to go out of my way to set up. Ivy is built into Doom Emacs, so that's another one that you really, I didn't have to install any extra plugins or extensions for this stuff. I just had to make sure it was enabled in a knit.el. Line settings, this is just toggle truncate lines. I added that key binding, so I added this section. What is truncated lines? You see how this line here is so long that it eventually wraps around? That's a truncated line. If I did not want that, I could do space TT to toggle that. Now this line goes on forever off the screen somewhere. I would have to get in here, actually move my cursor to follow that. Actually, it didn't even follow it. Oh well. Well, it did. It actually didn't move the window. My cursor actually did keep going. It was just off camera. Well, that is truncated lines. This man pages section, for some reason I needed to require graph for something. I'm not sure what I was doing here. I didn't leave myself a description, so we'll ignore that. Mastodon. Okay. This is interesting. There is a plugin called mastodon.el. You guys know my preferred social network of choice is Mastodon. So let's launch Mastodon. So meta X, and then type the word Mastodon. It's asking me for my email. It's going to ask for my password. So let me pull up my pass menu here and grab my Mastodon password here. Let's see if I can paste it here. And it is connecting to mastodon.technology, and this is my Mastodon here. I guess this is the federated feed here. No direct messages or anything. It's just random junk here. Kill that buffer. Let's get back to config.org. And yes, I can actually read direct messages and post and everything like that with that plugin. I've played with it just a little bit. Typically, I don't use it, though, because if I want to actually spend some time in Mastodon reading or messaging people, I probably just pull up a web browser. Same thing with this next plugin. It's a Reddit plugin. It actually does not work correctly right now. I've had it working in the past. For some reason, it's not working right now. It's just a way to read Reddit inside Emacs, kind of like what you just saw with Mastodon. It works that same way, and you can see the subreddits that I was following here. We'll skip that for now. I probably will skip this next section here. MU4E. Actually, we may cover this. This is deep, though, especially since I'm not actually going to go through the entire process of setting up email. This is one of those videos that's been really requested by you guys. And it's tricky because, setting up email, like I have several email accounts. Most of them I don't want to show you guys on camera when I'm setting up my email, and then passwords and things like that, and logging in, and with setting up MU4E, it's tricky because you're going to have to store your email messages offline. You're going to have to use MB sync, which that is tricky to set up. It's a command line thing that you got to set up outside of Emacs. You just install MB sync, I think, from the Arch repositories in my case. It's one that probably I need to eventually get around to doing a video on it. It's just, it would be a tricky video to make. Because I've gone through the trouble of setting up MU4E 2 or 3 times now. And every time I do it, I struggle myself setting it up because I never remember the steps I went through the last time I set it up. It always takes me like 2 hours to set it up every time I have to set it up brand new. Like if I reinstalled and, didn't save everything, well, I'll just reinstall Doom Emacs and set up MU4E again. Well, it's trickier than, well, I've got my config on GitLab. No, there's a lot more to it. Mainly, it's the stuff that doesn't involve Emacs that's tricky. Getting that MB sync command installed and working. Let's see, is your Qtile key bindings, they're in the config.py? Yeah. They are. And you were asking, did I use SXHKD there? No. There's no reason to use another key binding daemon like SXHKD for a window manager that already manages its own key bindings anyway. That's just extra bloat, right? Qtile manages its own key bindings. Yeah, every key binding I use for all of my window managers are in their actual configs. I don't bother with SXHKD, except for BSPWM, of course, because that's what it uses. Why isn't there a Debian user repository? That would be awesome. I agree. But I don't know if the Debian guys would want that. Because especially the free software stance, because kind of like the Arch user repository, one of the big reasons that the Arch user repository is there, a lot of people just package up proprietary software and put in it. Now, Arch isn't against proprietary software. They actually have a lot of proprietary software in the standard Arch repositories. Zoom, for example, I think now is in the standard Arch repository. It's proprietary. Discord also is in the standard Arch repositories. So they don't take the same kind of stands against proprietary software that Debian does. Yeah, there are like 100,000 packages there. MX adds to that with their package manager. Oh, you're talking about the Debian repositories. Yeah, I don't know how many packages are in the Debian repos, but yeah, it's very, very big. So MU4E, now those of you that want to try to set this up, you can go grab my config and you can probably figure out everything here. But the main thing is you need to install a package called not MU4E, I think it's just MU on Arch. There's a couple of things you need to install. I'm actually going to do a quick search here. let's see, Arch Linux MU. Just do a quick Google search just to make everybody mad here. MU in the Arch user repository here. And another one you want is it called MB sync? That's the command you use, but I think it's something else. Maybe it's iSync. Is it iSync? Anyway, it's like an offline way to grab your emails and store them locally on your system. That's what MU4E is doing. It's not actually connecting, and it's not actually pulling the stuff down from the web like webmail. It's just going to read this stuff locally on my machine. One of the tricky things is, everybody's web service is different. I don't use Gmail. 90% of you guys probably use Gmail, and I don't know how to set up Gmail for MU4E. But there are guides to that, thankfully, because it's one of the more common services. You can probably find guides to that. Moving on, Neotree. I don't really use file trees, but Neotree, I think, is installed by default in Doom Emacs. It is. Is it enabled by default? I think it is. Let's see. Did I actually set any key bindings for it? Yeah, I set space T in, because by default Doom Emacs sets most key bindings that involve toggling something to space T key binding. So I did space T in to toggle Neotree. Space T in. There is Neotree. It opens in the directory we're currently in by default. But if I did space D in for open directory in Neotree, watch what happens. Space D in. Open directory in Neotree. What directory? Well, let's go to, let's just go in the home directory. Yeah, let's get a big directory. You guys can kind of see how this looks. It's an attractive file tree, and you can navigate around and open things and, all of that. I think just Q to quit. Yeah, Q to quit. Or if I preferred, space T in again would toggle it off since it was already on. Then I have this section here, open specific files. This was just an exercise for me to see if I could have a key binding where I hit a key binding and a specific file I work in all the time would come up. That's the only reason I have this, is I just wanted to see if I could do that. And I thought what I would do is all of my Doom Emacs configs, related files like the agenda.org and my eShell aliases, could I set key bindings for them to where anytime I needed them, I just had a quick way to pull them up instead of having to search through my recent files. I set those to space, dash, and then a key binding. So it looks like if I did space dash C, oh, that wasn't a dash, space dash C. But we're already here, so space dash A for agenda, space dash S. That wasn't one of the ones, space. What was the key bindings? Space dash E for init, space dash I for init, not E. All right. Yeah, there's the init. All right, space dash C. Okay. I don't actually use these. I just put this here just to show you guys how this works. Now I create a key binding, and then I set these key bindings to this function, and this lambda function, which is a function where you're not really defining anything. It's just for this here. This is I really am not exactly sure how to describe what that lambda is, but it's basically all you need to know is once I have this here, what is it going to run? It's going to run the command find file at the location of the file. Find file is typically the command that you get when you do space period. That's actually, you can see find file. If you give find file a destination though, instead of getting the interactive menu, it just opens it. Org mode, we're probably going to skip this section. Gigantic section of my config. I set org bullets. You guys are wondering how I get the fancy bullets. I install a third-party package called org bullets, and then I require it. You see, after org, because this is very important, after org, meaning after org loads by default in Doom, then I want you to override some of what Doom Emacs is doing. For example, go ahead and load the org bullets. If you don't have after here, and you just have require org bullets, don't be surprised if require org bullets launches immediately, and then when Doom Emacs loads its own config, you know, its default configuration, it overwrites all this stuff. So, and I actually have that function there after in several parts of this config, because I've learned if I don't have that, things don't work right, because it just, the default Doom config just overwrites everything that you're putting in your config. So that's org bullets. I also set some stuff, the location of my agenda file, which you guys saw a minute ago, agenda.org. Org journal, the location to my org journal. I don't actually use org journal, but if I ever did, it's there. Org to do keywords. So these are, you know, setting things to do, or in my case, I set blogs I want to write, or a video I need to make, or things I'm doing at the gym that day, whatever it happens to be. Oh, if I do space O, I think for agenda, org agenda, yeah. And let's see. Do A. Is it going to give me a new menu? Yeah. And then I could do to-do list. There are everything that's marked as to-do. I had to think about that. I don't often use the agenda, really. Matter of fact, that's the same agenda I think I created for the video I did about it a while back. Let's kill that. Let's kill that buffer. We got too many buffers open. Let's just start killing them all. Let me get into normal mode here. Yeah, kill that. All right. Moving on. Org, babel, tangle. I'm not exactly sure why I am writing this. What am I doing here? It says, I was tired of having to run org, babel, tangle after saving my literate configs. Okay, so this basically in my literate configs, so any of my config files that are org document, I don't want to have to do a :w to write this, and then typically what you'd have to do is do a org, babel, tangle to then have this org document then write to the real config file. In this case, config.el or xmonad, my readme.org for xmonad writes to xmonad.hs. I want to automate that process. That's what I was doing there. I did not write these functions because I can tell you this looks complicated, right? I guarantee you, I grabbed that from Stack Exchange, right? There's no way I wrote that. Registers, table of contents, but I want one unfolded so I can actually work with what I'm working with. So, how I do that is, what was the key binding? I'm going to have to go back to the key binding now. Where was it? Splits, space BC. So I do space BC. Now I've done this command here, clone indirect buffer other window, where now when I do shift tab and I fold this document, this one's not folded anymore. Now I can have those independent of each other. All right. It looks like I had a connection issue. It says chat disconnected. Please wait while we try to connect. Did I lose the stream? You guys in the chat, let me know. Are we back? That was weird, because I got a message saying OBS disconnected for a second, and it looks like the YouTube chat is saying it's disconnected. Unable to connect chat. Try again. But I'm watching the stream right now, and it looks like we're streaming. All right, is anybody in the YouTube chat? All right, sorry guys. Now the network, yeah, that was weird. It looks like it's back up now. Hold on a second, let me refresh everything on my end here. Yeah, that was weird. I should have no network issues here today. Matter of fact, we've had good, strong signals and everything. I don't know. I don't know what that was. It happened just for a second. I've actually never had that happen before, where OBS actually gave me a warning message there. It had a pop-up that said disconnected, and then it said reconnected, and then I had that message in the YouTube chat. I've never seen that message either. That was weird. Yeah. Well, hopefully you guys... Hopefully I wasn't down for that long. It says only a few minutes? Well, I was gone for minutes? I killed the buffer with the... When I was killing buffers, that's when it happened. Okay. Ah. Well, that was weird, because I didn't kill a buffer that had anything to do with... Right, OBS is not running inside Emacs, so... Yeah, that was very weird. So what was the last thing you guys saw me killing buffers? I can't... What was I doing there? Let me get back into the config. Alright, I was talking about... I skipped registers. You guys saw me talk about remote connections and how I SSH into these servers. Give me a yay or a nay on that, because we got that far. I'm just going to keep going. Drink a cup of my cold coffee. Yep. Okay. Well, I got a yep and a nay. Ah, the part I copied from Stack Overflow. Okay. Well, we were pretty close to that. Okay. So, that would be the org babble tangle part. And then the next section, okay, was registers. And I was actually just going to skip that, because that's probably one I want to make a proper video about. Registers are essentially, I mentioned buffers, or, you know, the documents you open, they're all in their own buffer. A register, think of as clipboards. You copy stuff to registers, and you can pull them back up when you need them. That's what a register is. For example, if I wanted to copy this to a register, well, copy to register. Space RC is what that I set that to, so space RC. All right, and if I want to view a register, space RV, space RV. Did not do, I messed that command up. I must not have been in normal mode, so let's do that again. So if I want to copy this to a register, space RC, copy to register, non-input character. I need to yank it, space RC maybe, copy to register. I don't know why that's not working. Maybe that's not what I wanted to do there. I've played with these before. Looks like the default key bindings were Control X followed by R for the registers. Let's see if I can view a register. Is there a list of registers? List registers, space RL. It says wrong type argument. I don't know why that's not working. It has worked before, but we've done some weird stuff in this config. We've restarted and resynced some stuff. We turned Centaur Tabs on, you know, things that weren't here before. I don't know. Maybe I actually should just close this out and restart Emacs. Matter of fact, so you guys can see how this works, because I don't want the tabs anymore anyway. They're kind of annoying. Let's go ahead and comment out the tabs. Let's close Emacs. Oh, we got a million buffers open. I'm going to pull up a terminal. And then you guys remember the command .emacs.d/bin/doom space sync. Or in my case, I just doom sync, all one word. It takes a second to rebuild. All right. Let me get back into big font mode. Probably didn't help I had a couple of dozen buffers going on. I really don't know what the problem with the stream was there. That was really weird. Now we can actually view the list of buffers, although there's registers. There's no registers here. But that's weird. That would not work before. I don't know why it didn't work before and it works now. I bet I could actually copy now. All right. And that looked like that was going to work. And now I list registers, and there it is. Emacs registers or compartments. You know, it just gives me a preview of what I copied here. If I wanted to, well, let me get into that split. You know, I could pick that and copy it and yank it or paste it, you know, into a document. It's a way basically to copy and paste something. You know, you save it to a register and then you can take it from a register. Think of it again, they're kind of like clipboards. Remote connections, these are just ways for me to SSH into remote servers, and it uses the exact same find file command, you know, space period find file, except the location is /SCP. SCP is a SSH protocol for secure connections, basically remoting into a machine, SSHing into in this case, some web servers. Shells, these are things dealing with the shells within Emacs, such as when I do metax shell, for example. Typically, if I hit enter on this, it's going to ask me what shell do I want to load up. And by default, it's going to have bin/bash listed, but I can change that to /bin/zsh or /bin/fish. I got tired of always changing that to fish, so I just set that right here. Shell file name is bin fish. Then I have some eShell stuff that I set here, such as the location of my eShell aliases file, the history size, etc. I have a key binding to pull up the eShell's history, which we saw earlier with that pos frame thing. So if I do Control ES here in Xmonad to bring up the eShell, then I do space EH, but I have to be in normal mode, space EH. There's the eShell history, and again, using the Ivy pos frame to center it rather than have it in that horizontal split. Close that. The next section is splits. You guys know about splits. I did a video about splits in Emacs. I did a specific video dealing with splits. I think I also did a video about Vim and splits. And it's the same information in both, because if you use evil mode within Emacs, you're using a lot of the same commands and things. It handles splits almost exactly the same. All right, we're getting close to the last part of the config. I already talked about winter mode, so Sublimity. This is a third-party plugin I installed just because I wanted to try it out. I personally wouldn't use it, but I put it here just in case you guys want to use it. So I'm going to change Sublimity-mode from 0 to 1 to enable it. And then, let me see if I reload my Doom Emacs. Oh, those dang shell color scripts. One of them wanted to run there. All right. You guys see the mini-map? That is enabled from require sublimity-map. I also require sublimity-scroll. What does this do? It gives you smooth mouse wheel scrolling, which is really nice. That's actually the reason I installed this, was for the sublimity scroll, but it's got two other functions. It's got the sublimity mini-map, which is weird because the mini-map, when I'm... Yeah. Undo all that. Oh, I hope I didn't mess anything up. All right. The mini-map, you see when I'm scrolling around or moving the mouse. And I did mess that up because... What happened to the sublimity section? That's unfortunate. But that's alright. That's why I version control everything. But you know what? I almost remember what it was. Something's not working with my key bindings. Wow, that is weird. That text just magically appeared there. I don't know about this sublimity mode thing. I'm going to turn that off. You guys got to see the mini-map, but there was something weird going on with that, and I think it might have something to do with the smooth scrolling or the mini-map, because that's the only thing that changed there. That was weird. Emacs was running very strange there. So I'm going to turn off the mini-map. Winter mode we already saw. I think I covered most things. Obviously, I skipped some stuff here. So, MD, the subreddit thing that I told you guys didn't work properly. It loaded up. That is actually what's causing the problem, because that does not work for some reason. Like it doesn't display the right subreddits and everything. Let's comment that out. That is what is freezing Emacs. It wasn't the sublimity mode. So you guys that want the sublimity mini-map, you're probably good on that. But don't use MD4RD, which is an Emacs Reddit client. It stands for Mode for Reddit. Apparently, at least what I was doing there was buggy as hell. So, let me get back to the top. All right, so I think we covered pretty much everything here. Obviously, I just barely talked about some of the big topics. Ivy is deep. Org mode is deep. I have done some videos about org mode, though, if you want some explanations on org mode. Dear Ed, I probably need to eventually make a video specifically about Dear Ed. I probably need to eventually make a video specifically about registers as well. All right, guys. Well, we've been going for an hour and 35 minutes. Probably stream another 5 or 10 minutes and we'll call it a day. If you guys got any questions or comments, anything Emacs related or Linux related or whatever, I'll chat with you for another 5 or 10 minutes and then I got to head out. Let's see what I missed here in the chat. Let's see, Mr. DistroTube, the YouTuber who can't really use Emacs. Well, you misspelled distro. I know how to spell. Maybe I can't use Emacs. And the great thing about Emacs there, Adam, it does have spell check in it too, so you might want to install that plugin. Just saying. I kid, Adam. DT's hair is bloated. I shaved this morning. What hair? Oh, maybe the face? I don't know. I shaved this morning because I knew I was going to do this stream. I wanted to look good for you guys because it was starting to get kind of long. All right. Isn't this back and forth movement of the status bar annoying to you? I don't know. Was that question for me? And what status bar? You talking about within Emacs? Talking about the mode line in Emacs, which is this line down here that tells you, the document you're in, what mode you're in, such as org mode or Python or Haskell or whatever you happen to be in. It changes when you have splits, and the splits are at variable lengths. So yeah, when you're opening things, I guess it could be. I've never noticed that to be a problem using it. It may be a problem you guys watching on camera, because you got a lot of stuff going on the screen and you're not sure what's happening. All right. Yeah, where is DTOS? I don't know. I had a guy who messaged me on Mastodon, said he was going to create a Xmonad with Emacs with the fish shell with app images distribution. just for me. I'm going to call it DTOS. So I didn't have to, because I told you guys I didn't plan on doing anything like that myself. But we'll see. You know, I'm sure that probably more than one person is trying to put something like that together, since I made that video a while back, because I had 2 or 3 people contact me about that, or at least mention, hey, well, maybe I could put something together for you. Hey, whatever. MJ, thanks for what you do for the community, DT. Thank you, MJ. Appreciate that. In Xmonad, do you have to put changing the different slave window stack sizes individually? I don't. I mean, I can pull up my Xmonad config briefly here, which is an org document, but you'll see. The relevant thing here is actually, I have a section called layouts. I don't think I had it all capped, so there it is. The word layout appears a million times in this document. This file, it's like 1,000 lines long at this point. Anyway, my layout section here. Tall, that's the master and stack section. And I have some stuff about a sub layout, because I have tabs available to me as a sub layout within master and stack. But really, resizable tall here that I'm using, that's just your standard master and stack mode. Like, there's really nothing to it. I think that line, you just find that in the Xmonad documentation. That wasn't something I had to work on, but that's your master and stack right there. The rest of this, this is adding the tab sub layout. This is saying I only want a limit of 12 windows in master and stack. So 1 master and then 11 in the stack, and after that, just stack them on top of each other. You know, I will never have that many windows appear anyway, but that's just a way to limit the number of windows that are displayed. My spacing 8 is the border around the window, 8 pixels. So I don't know if any of that was what you were asking about, but just take a look at my config and look for the layout section if it was a question about the layouts. I meant the window manager bar, because it changes depending on number of characters, like in network graphic. Yeah, I don't know what you mean there. Of course the bar changes when the, they expand when the number gets bigger, but that's what it's supposed to do. So I'm not sure what you're asking there. Because how would it not expand unless you didn't want it to display the correct information? So you're going to have to clarify. I want to help you out there, but I'm not sure what you're asking. Let's see. Have you tried Theme Magic Package for Emacs? I have not. It allows you to apply your Emacs theme to the rest of Linux. Ah, okay. Well, that would be kind of cool. I've already kind of taken care of that anyway. Really, once I themed Xmobar and the Alacrity terminal, to be what they are, it's pretty much takes care of the total theming anyway. Adam Hughes says, well, thanks, DT, for convincing me never to use Emacs. Wow, Adam, are you trying to troll me? Let's see. Watch this. Put user in timeout. I've never used that before. I've always wanted to. He's just been timed out for 300 seconds, which is 5 minutes. I won't be here in 5 minutes, so... Problem solved there. Yeah, I don't know why you're going to troll the person that actually is running the stream, right? Not a bright move. Yeah, vanilla Emacs is terrible. Not necessarily. Well, if you're talking about the key bindings, like if you were just going to use like Control-X, Control-C, Control-X, Control-F, and all of that, those key bindings are bad. But vanilla Emacs, you're still going to configure it to your liking. So it ends up being whatever it is you want it to be anyway. But I do agree. I do not like, for example, find file in Doom Emacs space period. In vanilla Emacs, what is that? Control-X, Control-F? And that's a horrible key binding for something you're going to use all the time. I don't like those key bindings. Yeah. I used them for a month. I tried to use the vanilla GNU Emacs key bindings for the first 30 days I used Emacs, and I did do that. And seriously, I started having some hand issues because of all the Control-X or Control-X, Control-F, Control-X, Control-C, Control-X, it's just too much on the pinky especially. And I have a keyboard where Control is actually close in because it's actually the Z key on my keyboard, on my ErgoDocs. If it was further out, I can't imagine what kind of pain I might have been in. Let's see. Yeah, we were talking about Xmo bar. I meant the window manager bar. It changes depending on... let's see if this guy could explain what he's after there. I don't see him posting again. Yeah, I'm not sure what you were asking there. But yeah, obviously the bar has to change, like these modules have to change width when the information changes, you know. So, it also changes width over here, depending on